I'm Jeff Miller. I'm the marketing rep for NAU Country for Kansas, manager of the marketing in the southern region. We've got Mark Driskell on with me today, the Missouri marketing rep. He's going to go over quoting here in a little bit. I'm going to move through the presentation here fairly quickly. If you have questions, please put them in the chat. We will address them and answer them at the end. You are able to unmute yourselves at the end and ask if need be. But like I said, we would prefer it to come in the chat so we can read the question back to everybody and answer it at that time. So with that, like I said, we will move through the 2024 Pasture, Range, and Forage presentation. As I said, some of this will be review and some is new, so bear with us. Like I said, we have new people coming on, and so like I said, some of it will be a bit of a review, and some of it will be the changes for 2024. So PRF, what is it? It is a plan of insurance at RMA that is subsidized. It is available in all 48 contiguous states. Our NAU does right in all 48 contiguous states. They do have records going back to 48, and they will use the information up to 2022 for the 24 crop year. It is single peril, lack of rainfall only. It does not cover perils such as flood, fire, or hail. It is not drought insurance, meaning it doesn't matter where you show up on the drought monitor. That does not guarantee that any indemnities will come from PRF. It is simply single peril, lack of rainfall. The government does keep track of the rainfall. So like I said, no, it doesn't matter where you end up on the drought monitor. That does not mean that you are going to get a check from the PRF policy. With that, they do have, I mentioned that you, like I said, you will be in a 12 by 12 mile grid. There are over 6,000 reporting stations for those of you that have been in crop insurance for some time or around since the beginning of the PRF policy. This slide used to read 3,000 reporting stations. So they are continually updating it. But with that being said, there is not a rainfall gauge in every single approximate 12 by 12 mile grid. So for that, they use the Cressman method, which is just a math problem where they interpolate what happens in any one grid. They use the information from the typically four closest reporting stations. And they use the Cressman method and they interpolate what happens there. So just for your information, people want to know where are the rainfall reporting stations at. We've given you several websites throughout the years. Here is another one that they've given us, I think, last year. It is out there. I'm not telling you it's going to represent every single gauge that's out there, but it is a good place to reference to and go look if somebody's very concerned about where the gauges are or if there is one in their grid. This slide here talks about is an industry slide. It just kind of shows the growth of PRF from 16 to 21. Whenever we're in your offices as marketers, everybody's always asking, how do I grow my book of business? How do I increase the revenue for my agency? I've said this for many years and I will continue to say it. I do believe that PRF is a very good policy that can allow for that. It is new untapped acres that are out there and available. You can see from 16 to 21, there was an increase of 150 million acres in the program. So like I said, I think this is a great opportunity. I think livestock is another one. I think sometimes the two can go hand in hand. I think, like I said, this is an industry slide, not an NAU slide. Like I said, only goes up to 21, but I just know from NAU standpoint, this policy has grown tremendously just since 2021. So like I said, something that's out there and available, more for your information slide if you're interested in this. This is just a line graph kind of representing the same thing. You can see from 16 to 21, the trend of how the increase in the acres in the program, once again, an industry slide, but I can tell you certainly from NAU's point of view that the last 2 years, 22 and 23, that line is on the same trajectory. Here, this is as we get into the 2024 changes, this was a slide that was added basically for annual forage. There are no double cropping provisions in annual forage or PRF. So they've simply allowed, put some verbiage out there. This wouldn't come into play very often with the PRF, certainly much more for the annual forage, but they added the same verbiage that we put in annual forage into the PRF policy. Here, this one we talked about in the fall when we were at your multi-peril update. Just basically another place where you can go and get your certificate if you're in organic. They added organic to PRF a couple of years ago. And so if you're looking for their organic certificate, you can go here to the National Organic Program's Organic Integrity Database to look for that certificate. This here is probably the biggest change for 2024. Me growing up on a ranch, whenever I think about livestock, I sometimes, and you'll hear it today as I go through this presentation, you'll hear me say cattle. Well, you got to have cattle on there. Well, that's not entirely true. Yes, cattle is one, but livestock is actually what they're after. If you have the grazing type, you must show ownership in livestock, and your amount of ownership share in that livestock is what the share will be on the policy. Doesn't matter how much a part of the ground that you control or own. It's more of your interest in the livestock. But for this year, the big change is in their definition of livestock, they've added bison, buffalo as a form of livestock. So that in my mind is one of the bigger changes they made this year. This one here applies to haying. We've always said that it cannot be so steeply sloped that it cannot be mechanically harvested. Well, they have added to that. Not only can it not be so steeply sloped, it cannot be so covered by woody vegetation or cacti that it cannot be harvested. I kind of asked a question about this one, just curious, and they said, yeah, they went out on some reviews and they got there and there was so much cactus on the land that there was no way for it to be mechanically harvested. So it's just kind of something they are continuing to look at these a little bit closer. So just something to keep in mind when you're deciding. And like I said, obviously this one is pertaining to the hay ground. But if you're going to put it under the haying type, it must be suitable for that practice, for that type. Sorry. This one here, that was moved fairly quickly through the 2024 changes. They did leave on here the last 3 years changes. So we're going to move through those now. So just kind of something to be aware of. But in this one, they wanted to know how long into an interval, when you're getting towards the end of an interval, when does it cut off? Does it cut off at midnight? We know that sometimes within these intervals, it doesn't say that you're going to get the allotted amount of rain spread evenly across the interval. It just says that it will happen sometimes in the interval. And that is one thing that has happened. You get to the 60th day of an interval and you get all the rain for that interval on the last day or two. So when do they cut this off? This was something that came out last year. They cut it off at 8:55 Eastern time. So that's kind of they use it in 24-hour increments, but cut off at 8:55 on the last day of an interval, 8:55 Eastern time. So that's something that, like I said, that has come up. Please make sure, as you would with any multi-peril or any policy, please make sure you're verifying those tax IDs, double checking those now. It's been a year since you really messed with the policy. To me, please make sure you're double checking those. No indemnities are going to be paid out unless it has the right tax ID on the application. And this is just simply saying that it was inadvertent, that it was an accident, is not going to cut it. You're going to have to show why it was wrong once we get into a review type situation. And then depending on the answer, may or may not receive that indemnity. Here, like I said, this is also from 2023. A request for an FCIC review must be made within 30 days of the postmark date on the written notice of the determination regarding good farming practices. You've got 30 days if you're looking for a good farming practice determination. That's what that's saying. Here, all they did was reorder the language, and all this is really talking about is make sure that you can prove control livestock and control the ground. That's what they're looking for here. You have to have acceptable, verifiable livestock records. And so that's what they're looking at here. This is what I hit on a little bit ago. This isn't, this is what came out on September 28th. It was in the message center. It's in your emails. You all received one if you received the NAU emails, but it's also in the message center when you logged in. It's what I kind of talked about before the presentation started. And these are just different things. Basically, I put this out here. I'm not your mother and I'm not your keeper. But they put this out here for a reason and directly addressed it to PRF and annual forage. So if you are utilizing any of the practices below, I would certainly maybe not do that or, look at a different way. Like I said, they sent this out and directly pointed it at PRF and annual forage. And I think if you've seen all the changes they made to annual forage this year, they're definitely looking at these two products. So like I said, these are out there and available. If you click on the email that's in your message center, there's also an FAQ that's going to take you right out to RMA's website and give you additional information if any of these don't make sense to you. With that here, 2022, like I said, they've got the last 3-year changes on here just because there wasn't a lot of changes this year. Veteran farmer rancher, this came over in the multi-peril as well, basically just saying that one can be a veteran and one can be a non-veteran, and they can still qualify for the VFR. And they revised the language to say it's on the producer to start a dispute resolution through arbitration. And then we know that they have organic and you're going to have to get that certificate turned in. Here, they made this change there 2 years ago. There was a time in PRF several years ago where we couldn't use the 578 for anything within PRF. Then they came back here in 22 and they said, all right, we can use it as supporting documentation. Consider the 578 to be like a soft record, really. It can help with the finalization of a claim. It just can't finish the claim off. How do we finish it off? With what's down here in yellow. If you have a grazing permit, lease agreements, the lease certification form, things like this. This is what can help finalize the claim. Basically, the 578 just cannot be the only thing you turn in to prove share or to prove control of the ground. A reminder from 21, if you have ground that's crossing the U.S. border into Mexico or Canada, cannot insure ground that's in another country. So you would need to back off one grid away in a grid that is entirely in the United States and use that grid when you are insuring the policy. Just can't insure ground that's in another country. A reminder here from NOAA. Basically, this is saying that an RMA administrator will determine. They're not saying, they're basically admitting that not everything NOAA sends in is spot on, is exactly perfect. But they're saying they're not always going to go back and adjust when NOAA figures out that there has been an error in their reporting, in their rainfall reporting. They're not always going to go back and look at it. You know, one, they're not going to look at anything over a year ago. That's automatic. And then two, you can see there down there in the bullet, it says RMA administrator will determine if a change to the RI is warranted. So they're not going to make every little knick-knack change that comes along. They're going to look at it, decide if it's outside of a year, they're not going to look at it. And then if it's inside of the year, they may or may not make the change. This is just some verbiage that allows them some wiggle room, what I'm assuming. Points of reference, we know that the point of reference no longer has to come from the RMA website. They are allowing the companies to use their mapping software. We do have automated point of reference within ours. Jenny will go over this next week when she's talking about setting up the policy in the system. This is just showing the point of reference functionality within the system. Once again, we'll go over this next week. Points of reference, you can go to the tips and tricks. If it's something you're wanting to utilize this week, you can figure out how to update your points of reference. Just make sure that you have a point of reference for every non-contiguous field on the policy. Important reminders, leases and determining share. Just saying right here, 578 can't be the only one. For the intended use of grazing, the insurable interest is based upon the percentage of interest in the livestock, not the land itself. Be aware of that. They're going to be looking for control of the ground and also what your share in the livestock is. That's what they're going to be looking at in review situations. A lease certification form is available. If you cannot come up with a written lease, you can use a lease certification form. When we're proving control of the ground and these ownerships of the livestock, it's going to come down to a case-by-case basis. I can't give you a cookie-cutter answer right now. I know there's a lot of handshake deals and a lot of different things out there that could come up with a lease, different ways to prove ownership of livestock. So like I said, it's going to come down to a case-by-case basis. This is a picture of our lease certification form that is available and out there on the website. If you wish to utilize it, I know FSA also has a lease form that they have that I've seen, has all the information that we would need in a review situation. Important reminders, once you gather this information or have this information or start with the policy, make sure you keep the information for 3 years. Just like with multi-peril or anything like that, all reviews can go back for 3 years. So just because you don't get reviewed in year 1 or 2, you could possibly be reviewed in year 3. And so make sure that you have proof of control of the ground and proof of ownership of livestock, and that you keep it for 3 years. Failure to provide the supporting documentation could obviously nullify any indemnities. And also at the bottom, something that is still the same as we move forward, RMA is not issuing a stocking rate. They haven't since the beginning, and they're still not going to for 2024. Intended uses of grazing. Just make sure that you can prove that you have these livestock records. Or not prove that you have them, that you have them and that you keep them. Not only could it be for over 200,000, but it also could be that there is a 3% random audit. This is something in RMA mandates. 3% of all the policies that any AIP may have, they need to audit at least that many of their total amount of policies each year. Doesn't have to be the same ones. Like I said, it's 3% random. So like I said, just because you get pulled one year and you don't get pulled the next year, doesn't mean that doesn't mean you're never going to get reviewed. So make sure that you keep control of the ground, proof of control of the ground, and ownership in livestock for 3 years. Acres crossing state lines. This one's basically talking about, that if you get within a grid and you've got 2 grids side by side, one of them maybe has a county-based value or the historical indice shows a little more, as long as you enter into that grid, you can use it for the policy. However, if you cross a state line, you have to use whatever state a majority of the acres are located in. So kind of important to remember that one, 2 differences when you're crossing state lines or grids. For native sod, this one only applies to the states you can see under there on the second tab. It only applies in those states. Native sod acres will have liability based on 65% protection factor and a premium subsidy 50 percentage points less than would otherwise be provided. Now, if you till the native sod and then plant back to perennial grass, then no native sod rules will apply. However, if it is native sod and is never tilled, you can continue to insure it under PRF grazing, and there's no impact. So no impact. You can have 100% coverage. Special provisions. These have been in effect for several years. If you're in Arizona, Nevada, or Utah, you must have a minimum of 60 contiguous insured acres. Cannot have 3 separate 20-acre tracts and add them up to get to 60. It must be the minimum in these states here alone. You must have a minimum of 60 contiguous acres, and that starts the policy, that qualifies it, and then you can go forward from there and have as many acres or as many different non-contiguous fields as you want, as long as the first 60 are contiguous. And that is, once again, only in Arizona, Nevada, and Utah. There are 3 sources for reviews, obviously over the 200,000, same as it is for all subsidized policies. The 3% random review that we talked about, and then conflicts of interest. These are the three things that could trigger a review within a rainfall policy. And once again, we're going to be going back for ownership of the livestock, control of the ground. This is what I hit on a little bit ago when I talked about that reason that other one is a PDF. Verifiable records. What can you show? I said it was going to come down to a case-by-case basis. There are multiple examples right here on the PDF version that you have in front of you. There's another page, 2 pages actually, that show different things about what would qualify and verify proof of ownership, and then control of the ground, ownership, and livestock. So like I said, just something for your information. It is available on the PDF version that you pulled off the portal. There are a couple pages, and then it can also come down to a case-by-case basis. 2024 PRF rainfall policy documents are available. You can go to resources, forms, and type in PRF and hit enter, and all of the rainfall forms are going to come up. They all are out there and have been updated per the 2024 guidelines for policy documents. You can go out to RMA's website if you wish to and look for additional information. It is out there and available. We're going to kind of go over just an overview of the policy. I'm going to move through this fairly quickly. It is group-based coverage, same concept as area plans. As I've hit on already, it is rainfall, single peril. The only thing that we're going to look at, there is no APH. We're not going to look at any production off of it. The application acreage report must both be completed by December 1. They are due on December 1st. Coverage levels run 70 to 90%, with productivity factors running 60 to 150%. I would encourage you to stay towards the upper end of the coverage levels just to increase the likelihood of an indemnity. And then if the premium isn't where they would want it, you can always use the productivity factor and move it up or down to adjust that. Here, we've already hit on this. We know what is excluded. It's single peril, lack of rainfall. And then there on the right, these are the subsidy factors for the different coverage levels available for the PRF policy. Here's a simplified example. Got to be in at least 2 intervals. That's the same as it's been. Always got to be in at least 2. There are 11 different combinations of the 2-month intervals. Be in at least 2 with a maximum of 6. There is a minimum. Can't put any less than 10% of your acres in any one interval, and the maximum vary by state. Like I said, coverage levels in this particular example, they chose the 90% coverage level. The county-based values are different by state, by county, by practice, by type. So in this particular one, like I said, the dollar amount of protection is $45.36. The county-based value from the actuarials is 42. They brought the productivity factor up to 120%. Here, looks like they got into March, April. Got the same amount of coverage in each one. You got March, April, and June, July. RMA released the data 45 to 60 days after the end of the interval. And for March, April, it came in at 95. If this is above their 90% coverage level, there's no indemnity. However, in June, July, it came in at 42. This is below the 90% coverage level, obviously triggering an indemnity. The dates, contract change date, the date we get the changes for the policy, August 31st, sales closing date, December 1st, cancellation, debt termination dates, December 1, acreage reporting, December 1, premium billing is September 1. So for this year, PRF came in with the same exception that multi-peril did, giving you up until November 30th with no premium, with no interest attaching. So you have until November 30th to pay your premium without interest attaching. However, on December 1, interest will attach. You get 1 full day of this interest, and at 12:01 a.m. on December 2nd, we will cancel the policy. So it is very important. Like I said, make sure we get into the month of November, anybody that has not paid their premium, we get in there and get those premiums paid so that the policy can roll into the next year. Types and intended uses, two types, grazing and haying. We've hit on those a little bit. Must be suitable for the practice, cannot be, the acreage for grazing cannot be forest submitted or so rocky or so far from a water source that it could not be grazed. Haying, we hit on this one, cannot be so steeply sloped that it cannot be mechanically harvested. The verbiage added this year is that it cannot be so covered with forest or cacti that it cannot be mechanically harvested. Down below here, the very last line, or it's like the last line, it talks about it can have earlidge, green chop, things like that. These would be annual forage policies. And for 2024, we have passed the sales closing date for that of July 15th. Haying has both irrigated and non-irrigated practices. If you're interested in what practices are available in your particular area, you can go onto the actuarials and look those up. They are available actuarials on RMA's website. Haying has both irrigated and non-irrigated practices. Here below, as I mentioned earlier, by state, by county, by practice, by type, we can have different county-based values. There was a short time years ago when RMA went to a single, one by state. That was not very well received and was not very well thought out. So they did go back to different county-based values. They do adjust these on a yearly basis. So like I said, certainly you can go in there and look at those. You can buy those up with the productivity factor. You can have different coverage levels and productivity factors by practice and by type. So something that's out there and available. This is just how to put it on the application. You're not required to insure 100% of the acres. If you've got 1,000 acres and you just want to insure 500 of it, that is 100% fine. You may choose to insure either grazing or haying, but you can't put the same 100 acres on grazing and haying. You can't put them on both. You can also not put, if you've got 100 acres, you can't put 100 acres on PRF, and you can't put, and then the same 100 acres on annual forage. For different ground, you can have different types, have different practices, you have different plans, annual forage and PRF. You just cannot use the exact same ground for each, for every one of these things, all on the same 100 acres. I talked about the 12 by 12 mile grid. I should be better and say approximate 12 by 12 mile grid. We've had a few people get somewhat agitated because they said, well, it's 12 and a half by 12 and a half. There it is. Due to the curvature of the earth, as closer you get to the equator, it can get up to 17 miles by 17 miles of the grids. So a grid in North Dakota is going to be smaller than a grid in, say, southern Texas. So yes, we are aware of that. It is approximately 12 by 12 miles in the grid. This is just showing overlaid longitude and latitude lines and showing the approximation of 12 by 12 mile grids. Insured must select a point of reference. We've hit on that. We have automated points of reference within the Quick River systems. We will show that next week. Must have one for each non-contiguous piece of ground. Percent of value. Here, instead of saying, I talked about 100 acres, you can't just say, yeah, I put 50 acres here and 50 acres there. You tell us what the total number of acres are, and then you divide it, or not, you divide it down by percentages. You putting no less, if you can see here, a minimum no less than 10%. That is a nationwide rule, no less than 10% in any one interval, and no more than whatever your state allows for. Nebraska and Kansas is a maximum of 60% in any one interval. South Dakota and North Dakota is a maximum of 70%. North Carolina, South Carolina has a maximum of 50%. Please kind of be aware of those as we go forward. They do need to add up exactly to 100% and must be a whole number when you divide them by interval, meaning you can't put 11.5% here and 11.5% there. It needs to be a whole number, meaning 11% and 12% or 11 and 11. Whatever it is, these whole numbers will add up exactly to 100%, not 100.1 or 99.9. We do have a decision, or there is a decision support tool out on our RMA's website. If you utilize it, Mark's going to be going over ours here in a little bit in the NAU system, whatever your preference is. The index intervals, as I hit on earlier, these are 2-month intervals. There's 11 different combinations of them. You must be in a minimum of 2, and then obviously not going to be in any over 6. They can't overlap, meaning you can't be in January, February, and February, March. This can't overlap as far as by practice. The intervals do act as mini insurance periods. Once an insurance period is over, say January, February, the government would then have 45 to 60 days to release that information. Yes, I am aware that sometimes they take 60 to 80 days. It is their program, and they release the information as soon as they can get it out. County-based values, as I said, these are different by practice, by type, by county, by state. RMA does update these from year to year, and they are the ones that come up with these county-based values. They allow you to use the productivity factor that runs from 60 to 150% that you can change in 1% intervals should you wish to buy up the productivity factor or buy down the productivity factor and adjust premium going either way accordingly. County-based values, like I said, are obviously higher for haying than they are for grazing. Like I said, these are out there. They're in the actuarials, and you can look those up. Productivity factor runs from 60 to 150% and can be changed in 1% increments. The trigger index is basically just if you buy a coverage level of 90% and the amount of rainfall comes in under 90% of the total for any one interval. Thus, your trigger index would be a trigger, something less than 90, trigger an indemnity. Once RMA releases the data, you can go out to RMA's website and see what it came in at. Like I said, if you have 90 in it, in this one, it came in at 27% for February, March. So obviously that's under 90, therefore trigger a payment. Requirements on the application, like I said, you got to have the name of the crop, got to have the plan, coverage levels, productivity factor, intended use, your intervals, and then basically your acreage report, which is a percent value, which is a sum that will add up to 100%. Points of reference, like I said, those are automated, and you must also have the disclaimer. This is an area type policy, and so you must have the disclaimer accompanied with the application. Now, letting them know that there is not a rain gauge in every single 12 by 12 mile grid, and that it's not on their specific ground. The application and completion example, we're not going to work through. Acreage reports requirements, got to have share, intended use, point of reference, grid ID. You tell us how many acres they have. They have 1,000 acres, and then you say, insurable acres, and then the insured acres. There's no minimum number of acres that must be insured under the PRF, other than if you are in those 3 states that does have a minimum of 60. Sold or leased acreage. This one's really talking about if you have a lease pulled from you. Basically, you get to December 1, you have the ground leased, you have your lease, everything's on the up and up, and then for whatever reason in the spring, the landlord says, nope, I can take this back from you. And as long as this is outside of your control, you will have to prove to us that it was outside of your control. You would still pay 100% of the premium, but you would be eligible for 100% of the indemnity throughout the entirety of the year, as long as it's outside of your control. Now, same instance, you get by December 1 and you have all of the ground, and then on May 1, you're like, I'm going to tear this up and plant it. I'm going to need to plant something on this. That is up to you. You are eligible for any indemnities into any interval you enter into. So you make it to May 1, paired up May 1, you can have all indemnities through May, June. You will pay 100% of the premium for the entirety of the year, but you will no longer receive any indemnities after May, June. The moral of these 2 slides is to let you know there is no way that you are going to get out of paying 100% of the premium. It just depends on what the situation is whether or not you get all of the indemnities or only indemnities up to the time frame when something changed. Acres not insurable, we've hit on this one a time or two. Grazing, it cannot be so steeply sloped or so far from water source that cattle, I did it. Livestock should not graze. Haying cannot be so steeply sloped or covered by water that it is impractical or impossible to hay. Also, addition this year, cannot be so heavily wooded or covered with cacti that it could not be mechanically harvested. So obviously, cannot insure ground that's annually planted. That would be an annual forage type. And then this bottom line, I kind of want to hit on this one, cannot insure acreage acquired planted after the acreage reporting date. I kind of behind the planted, basically for PRF, it has to be planted prior to July 1 of the previous year. So if you had ground that was planted prior to July 1, 2023, it could possibly go on PRF for the 2024 crop year. So like I said, July 1st is the date that it must be planted to be insured for the following year under the PRF policy, depending on what that crop is. If it has to be planted every year before July 1, it wouldn't be PRF. Naturally reproducing grasses, that's what PRF is. Your units, crop, intended use, index, interval, these are the things that you would need by unit. We do have tools in EASYquote. Mark is going to go over that. We do have the historical indices where you can go back and look and kind of compare on how your policy would have performed in past years. The estimated rainfall report. So the estimated rainfall report, everybody's talking about, well, you're insuring 90% of it, 90% of value. Well, 90% of what? Well, once you enter into an interval, you can go and look January, February and be like, okay, in January, February, and I know it doesn't typically rain 10 inches in January, February, but for me to use Blue Mountain math and use 10 inches. January, February, you get 10, the average rainfall is 10 inches. You buy 90% coverage level. You're basically buying 9 inches of rain. So that's what they can kind of look at if they want to know how much rainfall they're buying. The potential indemnity report. This is a good report that's out there. As I said, RMA will release their data 45 to 60 days after the end of an interval. So we can go out and talk to our farmers and talk to our insurers, ranchers, whatever they may be, and be like, hey, within 5 days of the end of an interval, you can go out here and look at the estimated results, and we can go in there and we can look at the raw data and estimate if a possible indemnity may come through. And so you can kind of be talking to them, say, hey, it was very dry in January, February. It looks like the possibility that there is going to be a payout in January, February. Now, it is going to give you an exact number. However, I would encourage you not to call your farmer and tell them, hey, you're getting $738.42. Doesn't seem like a good idea. It is estimated. Just say, hey, it looks like that there's going to be maybe a little over $700 available, 45 to 60 days whenever RMA makes this official. I will tell you, in the 4 or 5 years we've had this report, it's only been wrong one time, but it was very wrong that one time. There was corruption in the data. It is what it is. But just like I said, let them know the possibility exists. I wouldn't go out there and give them the exact numbers. With that, this is just talking about what I went over. It's showing you how to get to the potential indemnity report, how to get to the rainfall report. Mark's going to go over that in just a second live. With that, are there any questions? Mark, was there anything in the chat?
No, Jeff, there hasn't been any questions put in there. If you guys have questions, it'd be a great time to either take yourself off of mute and ask them, or throw them in chat, preferably. That way we can read it to the group and go from there.
Mark, is everything working? Can I share over to you?
Yep, share over to me. Okay, Jeff, can you see my EasyWriter Pro screen?
I can.
All right. So I'm going to go into the quoter. We're in the 2024 demo system. So if things run a little bit slower, and here it is because we're in demo mode, we got to mask all the PII. So we're going to go in right along this blue ribbon here. You're going to go into EASYquote. This is how we're going to get to our quoter. Probably been in here for MPCI. We'll start with just creating a brand new quote. If you have a customer that comes in, doesn't currently have a policy with you of any type, we would go into the MPCI attributes box, open it up, and it's going to bring us up our attributes box. Now I'll tell you that this top third right here, down at the very bottom, there's a save coverage info as default. I've defaulted mine just for speed today, but if you're working in the same state, county, you can set that default. Otherwise, if you don't, every time you're going to come in, you'll just have to select your states. If you're writing in multiple states or multiple counties, you may not want this defaulted, but like say for mine, I did. So we're going to look at Kansas. We're going to look at Lynn County. There's drop down of all the counties in Kansas. I've got Lynn County selected as my default. Under the crop is where we're going to pick our pasture, rangeland, and forage policy. It's the rainfall index plan. Can't change that. And over to the right of that is the type. So if we're looking at grazing or haying, I will show you how to add both practices today. When we select our grazing, it's going to give us our interval list down here. At this point, it really doesn't matter which one you pick to get through here. It's just what we're using to get to the historical where we can actually make our selection. So I'm just going to stay with January and February. The system will default to a 90% coverage level and 150% productivity factor. I'll leave that there. I'm going to show you once we get into the historicals how I can change that. Jeff mentioned earlier, if I need to adjust the premium down, maybe somebody's not comfortable with that, we can play with those numbers a little bit, but we'll leave that at the default of 90 and 150. Don't really worry about the unit line right here. Don't need to do a whole lot with that at this point. It's going to default to 100% share. If you know somebody only has 50% ownership in his livestock, and you want to pare that down to the 50% or whatever, you certainly can do that here under the share. Down below that, you're going to notice on the right, it's going to default to 100 acres. I'm going to change that to 500 just for fun. Whatever the acres are, as Jeff mentioned, they don't have to put every acre into the system, but let's say they have 100 acres or 500 acres of owned or leased ground that they're using. The most important thing is, where does that ground sit? Jeff mentioned we have these grid IDs. Well, if I drop that down, that gives me the different 12 by 12 approximate grid IDs that are in Lynn County, Kansas. Well, I don't know what grid I'm in, so how am I going to figure that out? To the next right of that is the locate grid link, and I'm going to open that up, and it's going to bring me into a aerial view of Lynn County, Kansas. If I go up here now, I'm in Lynn County. Okay, I've got. You're going to notice all these grayed out fields. When you're in the actual live system, you're not going to see these fields. This is bringing in policy fields that are within our system for some reason. You will not see that when you're not in demo mode, so don't worry about that too much. But over here on the bottom left side is our panning tool. So if I wanted to move around, zoom around, I can hover over that, and it's going to tell me which one, zoom in, zoom out. But what I like to do is go up here under the find location at the top, and I'm just going to type in Blue Mound. So the system's going to recognize that I'm in Kansas, go to Blue Mound, and it's going to put me right in the town of Blue Mound. Now, that's obviously not where my ground sits. It dropped a little flag there that's going to indicate my longitude and latitude. I'm going to go over here to that tool icon on the left and just clear my marker out of the way. And then if it's going to automatically default to where I can set my pin. But let's say that we're just to the west of Blue Mound a little bit, and I'm going to drop a pin in the field that I own. This is my contiguous fields. So this is where we're going to start. It's going to mark that I'm in 21740 at the very top. Again, longitude and latitude's there. And all I have to do is click OK. And now it's going to bring that into my system. Jeff talked about the county-based value. So in Lynn County, Kansas, grass is $46.90. My dollar amount of insurance is going to be $63.32. How I got there was I took my county-based coverage, multiplied it by the 150% productivity factor that I'm telling it I want, times my maximum coverage level I can get of 90%. So that gives me $63.32 worth of insurance per acre. Now, Jeff talked about the minimum that we can put any 2-month mini insurance period is 10%. In Kansas, it's telling me I can put a maximum of 60%. Some states you're in may only be 50%, but it will let you know here. And if you try to put in an amount that's different than what is allowed, the system's smart enough to know and tell you that you can't do that. So we're just going to put 50% here to get us by here. We'll drop down to the bottom and hit save. And mine's going to bring me into the historical. Don't worry, depending on how you have your default set up, yours may bring you into the standard full farm view that you're looking at. Here, just go to the historical tab if it doesn't automatically take you into it. And here's where we can make our decisions. So at the very top half, it's telling me, giving me back from 2004. It's giving me the, hold on, I need to move this box out of my way a little bit. So in 2004 to 2023, it's giving me all the historical data. This top box is telling us, for 2023 in January, February, it was wet. It was 159.3% of normal. Obviously, you wouldn't get a payment. We got a lot of moisture in January and February, but down below there in 22, it was 51.9% of normal, which based upon what we've gave it with the $63.32 an acre value, I would have got paid $26.80. So that's what that indemnity is telling you, is how much in the past would this policy have paid using today's information. So we can kind of go through, look at all the different intervals. You can kind of see how weather patterns cycle. February, March has been really wet the last several years since 2018. Do you feel like it's going to go into a drier pattern? But this is where the rancher or farmer can make their decisions based upon what's happened in the past. We get over here to June and July. Now, this one's still italicized here. It shouldn't be. June and July's been released. But if you see a number with the asterisk next to it, it just means it is estimated. It's pulling in daily information. So it's just telling you that information hasn't been set forth by RMA yet. If we look over here at August, September, obviously, they haven't set that index yet. We just got out of September, but it was 29% is what it's estimated. So it's very dry in August and September. Now down below here, this is where I like to look at to really kind of make my decisions. This is telling me in the last 20 years what the average index is, the last 10 and the last 5. The total next to that's telling me how much, if I just added all these up in the last 20 years, it would have equaled $211.08 an acre. The last 10 years, it would have been $133.61. And in the last 5 years, it's only been $26.80. Down below that, it's giving me how many times it triggered in the last 20 years. So in parentheses, it's saying 8. That means this policy would have triggered 8 out of 20 years in January, February. It would have triggered 5 out of 10 years in January, February, but only triggered once in the last 5 years. So next to it is the rate of return, and that's telling me for every $1 I put into the program, what I would have received back. So over 20 years, I would have been 69 cents ahead of the policy. The last 10 years, I had $1.13 ahead. That's a $2.13 rate of return. But in the last 5 years, I would have lost a little money. You're going to hear Jeff and I talk about all the time. This is an insurance policy, not an insurance promise. It will not pay out every year. And it could pay out, multiple years in a row, depending on what intervals you pick. So I always just, kind of like to preface this that, if it rains all year long, obviously this policy won't pay out all year. If I look down below January, February, it's giving my guarantee per acre of $63.32. That's my total liability. The gross premium is $12.76. Subsidized premium is $6.51. That's the cost share that the government's putting towards the policy. And as a farmer, I'm going to pay $6.26 an acre. Now I can go across, show this to the rancher, show this to the farmer. Where do you want to put your coverage? Do you want to put it solely where you need the rain to get your grass growing, or do you want to put it where you have the best chance of, possibly getting a payment throughout the year? So I'm going to go over here and I'm just going to make my decisions, look across here, and let's say that he comes in here and goes, I think I'll put, and I'm just going to use some numbers here on the far right where I'm going to put my numbers in. I'm going to put 25% in January and February. I think I'll put 20% in May, or 25% in May, June. I'm going to go August, September. I think I'll put 25% there. And then maybe I want to put 25% in November, December. Now it adds that up. If I hadn't hit to 100%, it would let me know. I'm going to apply this. And now it brings me up some other options I have. Now, maybe looking back 20 years is too much information. I can change this date range now to, maybe I only want to go back and look at the last 10 years. So I want to go back to 2014. Basically just cleans up this report just a little bit and takes away some of that older information. That's totally up to you. Coverage level, we looked over here at January and February and we were at $6.26. Maybe that's a little more than he wants to spend. Just simply by selecting the 85%, I dropped it down to $4.90. You'll see as I change the coverage levels, it adjusts the premium down here in the net premium. Jeff mentioned earlier, I like to keep that trigger as high as I can. There's only an 8% spread in subsidy level. But like I say, the lower the coverage level, the better chance it's not going to pay because we just got a lower trigger. So we'll leave this at 90. We can also adjust our productivity factor here. So maybe since, I don't need $63.32 an acre, let's see what 125% productivity would do. Takes my coverage down to $52.76 and it lowers my premium to $5.22. So we can play with this information all we want, get the premium down to maybe where he feels comfortable at. I'll move it back to $150. And then if you want to even clean this up more down below here in the intervals, I've got January and February selected, but I don't have Fed March or March, April. I can just select off of those and you can see how it just kind of cleans that up, and I can eventually get it down just to the intervals that he's actually working in. Here's the key. We've got all this done. We've got our intervals selected and we know this is what we, or think this is what we want to do for grazing. We need to go up right in the center where it says add, delete, and apply. We need to hit apply. Now you'll see over to the left of that, you have more than one line. So if you get in there and you do all that work and you go back over here to the full farm view and you only see one line, go back into historicals and hit this apply button up in the top center. You just didn't hit that. It takes that over to that system. Now you can see when I go into full farm, I've got my grazing. Maybe he's got some hay ground. I can go up here to this big add button. And I'm going to simply go in and instead of grazing, I'm going to select haying. And I'm going to say I want to create a new coverage. Now, if I wanted to change it from grazing to haying, I could do that by changing the selected, but I'm going to create a new coverage here. Continue. Jeff talked about we have irrigated, non-irrigated, and we have organic. So this first set of numbers we say is irrigated hay, then we go down to irrigated. I'm just going to go on down. We're non-irrigated. We're not looking at organic. So I'm going to go to this 5 series of numbers, and I'm going to pick February, March just to get me through here. I'm just going to go back down to my grid. I'm going to select a grid. Now it's telling me in Lynn County, Kansas on non-irrigated hay, it's got a county base value of $240. I would have an insured value of $324, leaving it 90% and 150 productivity. I'm going to leave my defaulted acres to 100. I'm going to put in 50% coverage and save it. Now you can see I have a hang line, but I only have one. So I know I need to, with that line highlighted automatically, go back over to historicals. You can see it's got over to the far right, 50% in February and March. And I'm going to go ahead and put 50% in June and July just to get through here. Hit apply down below that. Once again, go back up and hit apply in the center. Now when I go to my full farm, I've got my grazing, my 4 grazing intervals, and I have 2 haying intervals. Okay, so that's how we would add a different practice. You could also do that with a different county or different grid ID. That's perfectly fine. We go back over into historicals. There's a few other things we can start looking at now. So we kind of look this on a graph basis. If I go up here along the top next to historical detail and go to selected intervals, now this brings it in. And now you'll notice I had hang selected over here in this full farm view. Okay. So when I go to that historical tab and selected intervals, it's only looking at hang. It's telling me the 2 intervals that I picked, and now it just kind of cleaned it up a little bit. It's the exact same information. Here's how many times it's triggered in the last 20, the last 10, the last 5 years, what the total indemnities are, the rates of return. Down here in the graph, it just shows you a graph version. Anywhere in the green means you're in the money. If it's in the red, it means that you spent money and didn't gain a indemnity off of there. And then to the right of that is the same information, but again, just in a chart fashion. The scenario comparison. So I've got Feb, March, and June, July added for hang, and maybe the guy goes, you know, what if we picked a couple different intervals? How would that look against there? I can go up to the very center and hit add. We're just going to add a different interval, and maybe I want to look at, I don't know, July, August. Need to make sure I go down to my 5 series here, non-irrigated July, August. Hit save. And now over here, I put 50% in July, August, and maybe I'm going to put 50% in October, November. Again, we have to have our 100% equal. And now I'm comparing 2 scenarios, one on top of the other, looking at 2 different intervals to see which one the farmer would feel like is the better value. If he says, you know, my first decision, I think I'm going to stick with it, just go up and delete that scenario that we just added. Now I'm back to my normal February, March, and June and July. So that is looking at it just by the practice that you have selected from the full farm side. If I was in grazing, it would only look at grazing. Now, when I go to the scenario review, now this is looking at the full policy. It's looking at grazing and it's looking at haying. So it's giving me, as a policy would work, how many times it would have paid out, what the loss performance is. So scenario comparison, just looking at practice. Scenario review looks at the entire policy. Let's go back to the full farm view for a second. So we're back to where we started, and the guy says, okay, this is great. I got 600 acres insured over here on the far right. I've got a $5,650 net premium due, and I've got $64,000 worth of coverage. This is absolutely great, Mark, but, you know, would this policy have ever paid out for me in the past? You know, think it's going to work? I can go to the very top under this historical indices tab, and I can select any given year in the past to see how this policy, given the same premium, same rates, same coverage, would have performed. But we're just backcasting. So if I go to 2015, for example, and I just highlight 2015 and hit OK, I can see over here now on the far right below, in 15, this policy for the entire year, both practices would have paid me $9,348. I spent $5,650, so I'm ahead of the game. My rate of return is $1.65. That's pretty good. Now, I like to show the good, the bad, the ugly. You know, maybe we look at 2017. How would have 17 worked? Well, I got $13,783.17. Man, even better. Let's look at maybe, it looks like maybe in 19 it was a little wet. There you go. So in 19, he had lost money. He had lost about half. So the policy doesn't work every year, but you can look back at as far as you want, as many different years as you want, and show him, here's how it would have worked. You know, you'll hear us say a lot, you know, if you're just going to buy the policy for 1 year and just try it, that's great. You really need to stay in it 3 to 5 years to see it work. You know, hop in it for 3 or 5 years. You don't have to put all your acres in it. Just try a few. If it works the first year, add a few more. If it works 2 or 3 years, you know, if it doesn't work, don't add any, but give the policy a chance to work. So you can go back through here and you can kind of see, no matter what intervals you select, how it would have worked. Once you're done with that, you can just click right beside it, clear the historical indices, and it takes away that information. Now we have a lot of different reports you can run. So keep in mind when you go to run reports, depending on what view you're in, or what reports are going to be available. So for the full farm view, if I go to reports, I can see that I don't have a whole, I've got an estimated rainfall report, which if you're in 2024, since it hasn't happened yet, that report's just blank. It used to show us how many inches constituted that 100% of normal that Jeff was talking about. For whatever reason, that link broke and they just haven't fixed it. We are in the process. We've got a committee of people together that's in the process of completely rebuilding our PRF quoter, doing a lot of upgrades into the PRF system. We've got, you know, underwriters to marketers. We've got a great group of people that's been working on this, and I've been able to see some of the things they're doing on the quoter. It's going to be really slick. It won't be available this fall, but hopefully by next fall, when we start looking at 2025, it'll be there. And then this estimated rainfall will be picked. But the full farm view, you know, it's going to show you just kind of what the MPCI would do. There it just shows me, you know, one coverage level up, one down. We're at 90, so it's showing me 2 down, but it shows me what the coverage is and what the premium is. So you can show that to the farmer. If we look at the scenario view, it's just showing me for that particular interval and that particular practice. I don't really like this one a whole lot for PRF, but it's out there, it's available. And when I go to reports now, I have a screen report is the only thing that's available. If I go to historical, now I've got this historical. If I'm in the historical detail, now when I run the reports, I have a new rainfall vegetative index historical report. And if I select that, it's just what we're looking at in the system, except for the fact that you can print this off and take it to him. It's a little bit scattered, but is an option. What I like even better is if we go up to the very top under file, and if we go down to the bottom and we hit export to Excel. Now I've already got this pulled up because I'm demoing it slow, but here's what it's going to look like. Depending on if I leave all these on and I go into this Excel report, basically what I've done is I brought this over into an Excel format. Again, this example I used, I had just kind of cleaned it up. So I'm only showing February, March, June, and July, and my last interval of September, October. To clean it up, it's all that same information except for down below where it says net premium. Now I can go through and I can say, okay, if we change it to 85%, what's it going to do to my premium? And so I can play with the numbers here. So maybe you could put this on your desktop, go out, you know, if you're going to go visit with the farmer and you can make these adjustments, you can show him, but then you can make the adjustments to the coverage level before. So that's the Excel, export to Excel. You know, application, once we're done with this application, you can go up into the app. You can go to the MPCI application. Everything's kind of pre-filled here for you. You know, you don't have to use this. It looks a little different than what the normal PRF app looks like, but certainly you can use it. But it's just going to break it down. It's going to show me what intervals I've picked, what percent of value I've put in. It's going to have all my information in there. Jenny, next Tuesday, is going to be showing you new features we have. If you sit on the annual Forage webinars, by chance where we can push this information directly from EASYquote into EasyWriter Pro, save yourself a ton of steps. So make sure you're registered and signed up to go through that with Jenny next Tuesday. I believe from there, that was all I really wanted to show you. Any questions in the chat, Jeff?
No, there was one earlier. Basically, can you insure a horse boarding facility? They technically do not own the livestock, but they have purchased the hay if the pasture does not produce. The answer is no, as ownership of the livestock determines share in the policy. No ownership, no share. And then you're fixing it. The next question I think you're headed to is, can I view the estimated payout or the estimated rainfall? And I think we're fixing to go over that.
Yep.
So the last one is, are the quotes currently accurate yet? And the answer is yes. I'm responding to that one in the chat now. That's it.
Okay. So we've looked at how to quote from a new policy. Now you may have a currently insured that you simply need to make some adjustments on. So we can go up here, hit the little plus icon, bring back our 4 attributes box. And I'm going to go into open over here, and I'm going to look at a policy that I have pulled up in demo mode here. I think there we go. So I'm a cattle company. Here's our current policy holder. Open that up. We can see what this insured has had in the past. He's got Anderson and Linn County. He's got grazing. He's got all kinds of different intervals, how he's adjusted it. Maybe he wants to look at adding a few acres. Well, I can just, if I wanted to open up Anderson County and I wanted to adjust the acres, I could adjust the acres right here to the insurable acres. If I want to go into the historicals, now I can see what he has selected over here. He's got 135% productivity. I can change that. I can go down here. Now it's got my intervals already selected and the percentages, but if I go to the very bottom right and hit edit interval percent, now I can go through and maybe I want to change some different intervals or look at some different percentages or make some different options and different changes. Simply can do that from here. You would hit apply, once again hit apply, and it's going to update it back in the full farm view. So if you've already got somebody that's in the system, don't reinvent the wheel, open up their policy, just like we did with the new ones. Everything is going to pre-fill in. You just have to go in and make the adjustments. You can also do this. One of the features that we have is, Jeff talked about the growth of PRF, how well it's performing, how well it's doing, and probably the easiest way to grow your book because not everybody's out there hunting it. Maybe you have an MPCI insured who owns some cattle or puts up some hay, and you just want to give them an idea of what it would cost. You don't want to sit down with them, waste their time, really trying to talk them into it. You just want to leave them something or look into it. You can do that. Again, go to open, and I'm going to pull up an existing wheat customer. I think 703 7370. All right, so here's I'm a farmer, and this is going to pull up a wheat policy that somebody may have. Well, we have the legal location. Now, if they, and I've been told, and honestly, I don't use it from your side as much, if they've been registering or, certifying their grass or hay ground at FSA, I've been told it will sometimes bring this information in as well. But here's my wheat policy. I can go up under my edit at the very top, drop my edit down and go down to create PRF quote. Systems are going to think a little bit, kind of like it does when we're doing hail. Now it's going to bring me into, when I go to look at the full farm view, it brought me in and recognized that, okay, this tract of land, we recognize the grid that it sits in, 2260, 22645. It brought that in, it brought the amount of acres in that's showing that was grazing ground. And I can go into the historical tab now, and it puts 60% automatically in Jan-Feb. I can, adjust this however I want. I won't take a whole lot of time to do that, but I can go in, apply that. Once again, hit apply. The very top, go back over to the full farm view. And now I can show him, hey, on this 18 acres that you have, you spend $157 to cover $1,511 worth of coverage. So quick, simple, easy way to get something in front of them to let them know. It may bring in a whole bunch of acres and grids. It may bring in 1 or 2. It may bring in none, but it's something there. If you've got the insured in there, it's just a quicker way for you to be able to go in, print him off a quote, hand it to him, say, have you ever thought about PRF? Here's how it kind of works. You haven't really asked him to take time to do anything. You just be able to provide information based on where his ground actually sits at. So that is what I wanted to show you in EASYquote. I'm going to hop over into EasyWriter Pro, show you a couple of reports there. Again, 2024, it's kind of a weird time of year where we've been quoting wheat in 24, quoting PRF in 24, but we're turning claims in 23. So if you get in there and you see something doesn't look right, step back and go, okay, am I in the right crop year? I'm going to go in. Yes, sir.
We did have a question. Can you click on the scenario view? The question is, how can you print the bar chart showing the annual performance? Or was that in the historic?
Yeah. From the scenario view, the only report that I have to print this bar chart off is this screen quote. And when I print that off, it's going to print off something that looks identical to what we just looked at.
Not that one. It's on the
historical.
Yeah, the historical down. I think when you look at the selected intervals on that tab.
Yep. If I go to reports here and go down to the Rainfall Vegetation Index historical report.
Okay.
Now what you have to do, this just shows the top line, page 2. It's showing the intervals that I picked and the totals. Page 3. So it's not a super clean version, but it does show you everything that you're looking for there, depending on, what I've done is,
so there's not an ability to print that bar chart that shows down at the bottom left on that.
I think move over to the other tab, Mark, is what he's talking about.
The indemnities through the years, the red and the green chart,
Yep. No, I don't think there is. So you were here.
That one.
Yeah. I don't think there is a way to print that. Let's look here. I just want to look and see what this will. Nope, that was the same.
Look at the selected inverse.
Yeah, that's what I was going to look at next, Jeff, to see if I don't think it does, but maybe. Yeah, there you go. Selected intervals.
Okay.
Now, yep. So like I said, that's going to work for that practice. If you had both practices on there, if we go to my original that had 2 practices, let's look and see if that will, if we go to the scenario review. No. So yeah, so you could look at it by, you could run that selected interval report. But like I say, you'd have to probably do it twice by practice, it looks like.
Okay. Thanks.
Yeah, great question. Yeah, and sometimes, guys, when you get in here, I mean, you just kind of have to poke around, just like we did there. If you don't see a report, if it's highlighted, look at it and see. Again, some pretty neat features coming forward that I think you're really going to like next year. That I've seen. And so, like I said, you're not going to break anything. Here's my point. Go in, click around, hit reports. If you don't see it, check what view you're in. But like I said, you can't break anything here, because if I go into, man, I really think I screwed this up and I don't want to look at this anymore, I can go in and just exit out of this. And then if I wanted to open it back up, I can do it. And nothing I did save into it. Now, if I want to save it, you'll see when I close out of here, it's going to ask me, do you want to save it? You can definitely save it, and you can share it where only your login can see it. You can share it where other people in the office can see it. But if you go, man, I've just hit too many buttons. The other thing I will caution you on, if you ever get in here and you start playing around, and it happens to me all the time, I'll get an error message. Maybe I've selected, the same practice, but I was adding a grid and I chose same intervals, and it will say, no, you can't do that, and it will error out. If you ever get an error, stop, close out of it, and open up a new one, because once you get an error, it's hard to tell what information you'll see. So if you get an error message, if you've clicked on something wrong, just close out of it and start over, because like I say, it will throw some numbers up that you're gonna be like, what's going on here? So that's it from the quoter, unless there's more questions. I'm just going to go into, and feel free to ask them. I'm going to go back into EASYwriter Pro. But I'm going to go into 2023 and show you a couple of reports, and then I will be done with you. So from the report center, just right next to EASYquote, again, I'm in 2023. It's going to bring me into my reports. Now you're going to see under my favorites, I have these reports saved. If you go over to search reports, maybe you don't have any of these saved. And if I just type in PRF, So all I got to type in and hit enter. It's going to tell me what PRF reports are out there that I can run. Well, you've seen from my favorites that I already had these two selected. So if you find a report that you're going to use, continuously, just hit add favorite, and that's going to save it right here under your favorites. You don't have to search it every time. If you've got one that you put under your favorites and you go, man, I don't really, I don't use that as much as I thought. I don't want to see it. If you highlight it, hit remove favorite, it's just going to take it away from there. So we'll look at a couple things. First off, we talked about estimated rainfall. Jeff talked about, 100%. Well, big deal. What's 100%? I want to know what constitutes 100%. So I can go in and look at my state. I'm just going to pick Kansas. And I'm going to hit OK. My grid now. If you know what grid you're in, great. I'm just going to select one here that's in the middle, just for fun. You would know what grid. You could select the grid you want to see. I'm going to hit OK. Now my interval code. Now, these first sets of numbers, these are all PRF. So Jan, February, I'm just going to select all the ways down to November, December. That way I've got every interval covered. Once I get below November, December, now we start getting into annual forage intervals. So don't worry about those. So I'm going to select these first ones and hit OK. Hit OK again. And now it's going to bring me up for that grid and all the intervals, what the estimated and average rainfall is. So here, January, February. This is when the NOAA file was released. Show, if that's it in millimeters, I don't know what that even is. So we're from the United States. I want to look at inches, So we go over here. So current rainfall. So I can see in January, February, I know it's already passed. So I know what happened. In January and February, it rained 3.12 inches. The index was 144. Historically, the average rainfall, going back all the way to the very back 40s, is 2.16 inches. So I can go over here and look at this historical rainfall for any interval and tell them, hey, here's what the typical is. So for example, in March and April, it typically rains 5.45 inches in this this grid that I selected. But this year it was 2.66 inches. So I had a 48.8% index, going to get paid pretty well on this policy. So again, this is the estimated rainfall. If you go into 24, this is going to be blank because nothing's happened in 24 yet. So go back into 23. You can print this report off. There's a print feature up here. Put it in Excel, print and export. If you want to take this with you to show somebody, hey, in this interval you're in, here's what constitutes that 100%. If you equate it to inches, to me, it just makes sense. 100% of what is what I'm looking for. The other report that you're going to be able to run from here is the potential indemnity. Jeff mentioned that RMA, they have 45 to 60 days and likely will take most of it to release the payment. However, within about 3 days, sometimes 2 days after the end of the interval, we know what that NOAA information is, and we can give them an estimated payment amount that they would receive. Again, heard Jeff say it, don't swear it as the gospel. Don't tell them, hey, look, you're for sure getting $73.22 an acre or $1,200 and some dollars total. That's what you're getting. No, this is estimated. Give them the caveat, hey, they can change this, probably won't, but this is just an estimate. That way you're safe. You can go in and you can look at this by several different ones. I can see all the different agencies in here, so I would have to pare this down by agency code. You're only going to see your particular agency. I can look at this by a policy total. So if I just want to look at each individual policy, all I've got to do is put the policy number in, and I can look at it on a per policy basis. I can also look at it, put my agency code in, put what interval I want to look at. I can look at all my intervals that have passed. I can look at just the current interval that's been done. I can look at the state. Like I said, I can look at my entire book of business. So by policy, by interval, by agency, you've got a bunch of different ways to do this information. Now, because even though I'm in the demo system, if I pull this report up right now, it's going to show agency names and policy numbers, and I don't want to do that. So I've exported this to Excel just to kind of show you what this is going to look like. So here's my potential indemnity. I'm going in here. So now it's telling me what county I'm in. It's telling me grazing, what interval I'm in, 90% coverage level, 100% productivity factor. Show me everything I bought. And now I'm going to go in here and look at my county base value, my dollar amount of insurance. So I can look and know that 65.2% was my ending index. This insured, because this would give you the policy number and the insured's name over here. He's going to get an estimated $18.38 an acre indemnity for a total of $427. You know, so you can go down through there and call the guy up and say, hey, look, I know this interval just ended. Looks like you're going to get paid in this interval. Just to give them a soft touch to let them know, because otherwise we're just kind of waiting out here for 60 days going, man, did it work? Did it not work? Becomes very crucial this time of year when you've got somebody that's maybe on the fence and they've got intervals left to go. If they've got September, October, obviously they're not going to get paid until the end of December. So their premium was due at the 1st of December. So, it's a good way to kind of let them know. It's going to give you the daily estimates as well to say, look, I know that your premium's due, but it looks like you're going to trigger in a few of these later intervals. They still got to pay their premium, but at least you can kind of give them an idea if the money's coming or not. With that, Jeff, was there anything that I missed that I didn't go over that you were wanting me to show?
Show the, go back to the report center. We have a question here.
Okay.
And show the estimated rainfall report. Just show where it's at.
Okay. Just PRF. Again, just search over here in this white search bar if you want to, but it's just PRF, estimated rainfall.
Get the actual rain gauged official. This is it. This PRF estimated rainfall. That's the best that we have from RMA. And like I said, it pops up as soon as the beginning of an interval start. It doesn't come to you, I guess, would be the answer. It is here in this report.
Yep.
And
yeah,
then,
it just
go ahead.
Well, that's what I was going to say. It just, we don't know. I mean, there's rain gauges. There may be, a rain gauge in every there may be 2 rain gauges in a grid, but there may not be any rain gauges in a grid either. So, we just, like I say, it's interpolating the data. So to find out exactly what each individual rainfall station reported, we don't have access to that. Somebody may, but we don't. Like I said, this is just interpolating what happened in that 12 by 12 mile radius via, the Cressman method that Jeff talked about.
Okay. And then the next question is there a way to generate potential indemnity report? You can run it by individual policy. I do not know if you can hit batch print a potential indemnity report. I know you can run it by individual policy, but I don't know if you can batch print it.
I don't know. I've never used it there, Jeff. This is the only way that I know to print it by, like I said, by policy or by.
To do individual policy just became available last year. Usually you had to run the whole agency, and now they've made it available by individual policy.
Yeah. And that's where you go down right here to the bottom where it says policy, and you can just, when it looks just like it would on MPCI, you could type in the policy number, search by the name, and you could look just at that policy to see how it would have paid.
Yep. I will look into the batch printing. And that is it. Is there any other questions? I think we've answered everything in the chat. Yes. So with that, the presentation that we gave today was available here under training, down to help library. There we go. Help library training. The 2024 PRF webinar PowerPoint, the PDF version, as well as the rainfall checklist are available out here. And with that I think is everything. Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you. Thank you for business.